gentlemen, I give you Brigadier Duncan Scott.
Just a good afternoon from my side. I'm privileged to be here. Thank you to those that invited me. And I hope I'm not too controversial. I've been known to be one who speaks truth to power. But I believe you've had a speaker like that this morning already. Well done to her. As you can see on screen, I'm also speaking about something which is close to my heart, and I think it's impacting the airport and naturally the country as well. It's the insider threat. Just a little bit of background on that. In 2017, when I was sent to the airport, I was sent there because the airport was seen to be in a crisis. At the time, the senior police management saw me as a solution, and the actual priority threat, which was identified by our intelligence services at that time, was corruption, collusion, and the insider threat at the airport. And that spoke into 6 other threats that were identified at the strategic level. It could be found in each and every one of the other threats that were actually identified at the airport. So this is not a new phenomenon. And speaking to you here today, I know that corruption, the collusion, the inside threat at ports of entry in South Africa, for one, is a problem. But I can tell you that it finds itself across the world, in the airports around the world, maybe to different degrees. But I'll speak today on what we experience here at OR Tambo Airport in South Africa. So the presentation is going to go a little bit wider than the cargo sector, just to show you what actually goes on at an airport that you may not be always aware of. It doesn't always go to the news headlines, for that matter, but we are doing our best to actually work on that. But I can tell you, until we actually get some or other change and better political willpower to actually deal with this, we're continuing to be in a struggle that we just don't seem to be able to win. The scope of this presentation, for one, I'm just going to quickly cover what is the airport security and this new border law enforcement agency called the BMA, the Border Management Authority, that is come to South Africa. We will find it implemented at OR Tambo Airport as of the 1st of April. So I just want to bring you into the loop because it's going to impact the cargo sector as well. The endemic crimes that we find at the South African airports, I'll go over that with you. Just to quickly look at that internal threat. Some research into corruption at OR Tambo, which in fact I believe is similar to the other airports within our country. And then I just also want to show you ICAO's threat risk analysis and what they predict at the airports around the world, for that matter, not necessarily focusing only on cargo, but I think it will have an impact on the cargo sector if we don't address the insider threat. So understanding the airport security and border law enforcement, as you can see there, we've got this people that deal with preventative security at airports. Airports, specifically 3 of them in our country, are national key points as well, soon to be transitioning over to critical infrastructure, the new act. And so they are, the owner of the airport is responsible for the preventative security of that airport. These are all your screening points, these are your gate accesses, etc. So you may be asking the question, well, what are the South African police doing there then? Well, we're also written into the National Aviation Security Program, where we assist the airport owners according to the ICAO expectations on how to actually respond to crimes at the airport. So we've got the preventative security and the police, which are actually there predominantly also to prevent crime. It's our constitutional mandate. We combat crime, and if you want to know what the difference is, preventing crime is when you see mean, visible policing clothing, and we try to prevent crime from happening. But I think we're all aware that in today's age, the prevention of crime simply displaces crime. I may put policemen in an environment which I know there is criminal activity going on. It means the criminals will move. And that's why we go to crime combating techniques. That's where we start to employ undercover operations, etc., to catch people in the act, to prosecute them. My personal opinion is unless we prosecute, we continue to defer the crime problem. So we need to get them behind bars. And there I'm speaking specifically now to the airport employees. You can see the border law enforcement, which is border control and compliance at our ports of entry. And there's a number of institutions or departments involved there. Port health, immigration, customs, the old agriculture, environmental affairs, etc. Most of these are going to be encapsulated into the new Border Management Authority, other than customs. Later, possibly border customs enforcement will come over to BMA as well. So that just to put you in the picture, if you see new uniforms at the airport next year, some of them in your cargo warehouses, it'll be a BMA, the Border Management Authority, which is underway at the moment on our land border lines. So these are how those groupings are set up within their legislative mandates. The preventative and the security policing, as you can see, the Airports Company South Africa, just speaking to them at this stage, they own 9 of the airports in the country. And of course the police, responsible for that preventative security and policing, or the preventative policing. All right, responsive security and policing, also the Airports Company. But the police have a bigger role to play there. We are the first responders, and if there's any act of unlawful interference at the airport, it becomes a police role and responsibility to deal with, whether it's aviation related or whether it's on the land side and general crime related. And then of course you can see we've got the border law enforcement, where the BMA will be coming in specifically with its own act. There's been certain legislation carried over to the BMA from the relevant departments' acts, including the SAPS Act as well. So just to put you in that picture, these are the role players when it comes to the security, the border management, the border control at airports. So these are the endemic crimes that you'll find at Ortia. Human smuggling, human trafficking. Probably the biggest one that we are facing at the moment. And I know this is not within the cargo sector, but this is within our terminal buildings. And I'm sure that, I don't know how many foreigners we've got in the room. I'm assuming most of us here are South Africans. We know of the situation in our country at the moment with the amount of foreign immigrants, many of them illegally here in our country. And the question has to be asked, when we have certain profiled nationalities that are targeting our airports to get into this country, why are they doing that when the cost to get one of them here is approximately 120,000 Rand? It's cheaper just to get a visa. So the reason being that, one, he couldn't afford it. He becomes a work slave in South Africa on the streets. 2, he has got issues back in his home country, whether it be terrorism or other organized crime or crime-related issues that he has to leave his country for, or wants to leave his country because he's wanted, and so he gets smuggled into South Africa. So we're sitting twofold with a problem here. Now, when these people are coming onto our streets, the human smuggling victims, and they become work slaves, a lot of the counterfeit goods which are coming in through Durban Harbour or coming through Ortia Airport find their way onto our streets, and we find that they are sold in spaza shops or these shops that you find that are set up by foreign nationals as well. So there's a syndicate and there's a loop, there's a value chain that's going on. The cash that's generated from that gets exported back out of our country again, and so South Africa is bleeding from our economy. So it's in the interest that we clamp down on our port of entry border security and on our borderline security as well. It's impacting the economy of this country. It's stealing jobs from South African citizens. We're sitting with what is it now? I think it's a 32% unemployment rate in the country. And if you take that up to the 17 to 23-year-olds, we're somewhere in the 63%. These are people trying to enter the job market. Right, so it has an impact, and if we can start employing our security at our ports where there isn't an insider threat of corruption that is helping to facilitate foreign nationals into our country, it's a start. The crimes that you're seeing on screen, I'm not going to go through all of them. There's only one of them there that you can see the question mark that I have yet to have placed insider collusion with. And for that matter, I'm talking about at the airport. There has been insider collusion outside of the airport that actually helped to smuggle rhino horn out of this country. Right, from one of our law enforcement agencies. So every single one of these has got insider collusion attached to the organized syndicates that are smuggling the goods or the persons in or out of our country. So it's an exponential threat that we actually need to deal with. I just want to see where are we? Okay, I may have been a slide ahead of you. So there are the ticks and the question mark. So when we actually look at the airport itself, the airport is actually a funnel because goods and persons have to pass through that funnel. So we find the internal the criminal syndicates externally funneling the goods into South Africa to their internal syndicates which are local. So everything has to come through the airport. So the way that they see their success is how many people they've recruited and to what level have they recruited people within our airport, the criminal syndicates. So you can find anybody from cleaners that are contracted through the airports company through to senior members within some of the departments across the board, from the South African PoliceService to Customs to Home Affairs, across the board. We have made arrests at the airport. So it shows you that we have got a problem. And that recruitment takes place. But what also happens there, is there are internal syndicates within the airport that are not necessarily working with those outside. And I'm sure most of you have already been exposed to or have heard of people that have been extorted of money passing through our airport. Just last night, I was phoned by a member of the portfolio committee about somebody that had called him that has been extorted at our airport, not once, but by 3 different departments moving through the airport, trying to come home from a flight. From the time that he disembarked through to the international arrival, 3 different agencies extorted money off of that individual. So we've got a problem. Each of the other crimes I've mentioned as well, we can speak to on our actual crime statistics as well. I'm going to go past this quickly. We've got those that are benefiting as well. So when I say this as well, I heard a nice term last night after the cabinet reshuffle in South Africa. One of the opposition leaders said, and I quote, that the president hasn't got the moral authority to effect the changes needed. Close quote. Right, that was what he was saying. That is true at this airport. We find that the moral authority of our managers and our supervisors is impeded because they somewhere along the line have been compromised or they've submitted themselves because of intimidation. And so we find that the first line management specifically, and the higher it goes, the less it becomes. But unfortunately, when you expect to see the workforce doing its work, they're not being managed well by your first line supervisors because they've also been compromised. And their moral authority has been compromised for that matter. So these are drug situations that we find. This is just dealing with narcotics at the airport. It's one of our biggest issues, second to the human smuggling. And we find our drugs concealed in the cargo consignments. Now, I have an employee at the airport who has recently come clean. He's actually been to a rehab himself, and he's busy going through a process of turning over a new leaf. He's actually spoken to me in confidence and said to me, Brigadier, if you think the drug problem coming through the terminal buildings is big, he says you're not aware of what's going on in the cargo sector. He says it's massive. The amount of narcotics coming through there, but it's just because there's not enough attention paid to that environment because of the masses of cargo that comes through, so the detections are less. But when we do find narcotics coming through the cargo environments, we find a lot of precursors to narcotics as well. When the designer drugs are actually made in South Africa, we find the precursors coming through by the ton into South Africa when the busts are made. But this is definitely an environment that we need to give more attention to. And most of our scanning processes, if not all of the scanning processes, I'm going to qualify that in a moment for you, in the cargo environment, we're dealing with the safety of the aviation sector, isn't it? So we're looking for things that can hurt an aeroplane or the passengers on board, whether that's explosive devices, firearms, and the like. I'm not aware at this stage that we've got our scanners set up with the algorithms to find drugs moving through the cargo sector. For that matter, we only recently now have employed measures for about 2 years where we've built the algorithms through the Department of Environmental Affairs to start detecting rhino horn. So I asked that question, why is it that customs, for instance, would have these algorithms already because they can pick them up when you come through your customs checkpoint? Why is it not translated into the machines at the cargo warehouses so that we can start dealing with the problem on a wider basis, start finding the drugs coming through hand luggages, for instance, even in the terminal buildings, and not just waiting for customs to pull passengers? So in short, we've been working very much in silos, concerning ourselves about aviation safety and security, whereas we could actually be duplicating and having the scanning machines working on multiple algorithms. I could be wrong. I'm not a technical expert in that environment. Somebody may actually have a different view. Just to go through this, we've actually had, in August of 2017, we had 2 SAA air stewards, air hostess and an air steward, flying out to Hong Kong. The one was already in the air and couldn't be warned when the other one had landed. And both of them were bust for that matter. And as you can see, there was, this was on the previous slide. There was actually 45 million rands worth of cocaine being smuggled into Hong Kong for that matter. All those pictures that you see on that slide there are of drug busts within the last couple of years just at the airport. From bullets being swallowed and bullet swallowers, through to those that we find in the linings of baggage, through to the body packs that we find on people that are coming through, right, to those found in suitcases blatantly packed as bricks covered with blankets, and then of course the bottom right picture being that which we find in the cargo warehouses themselves. As I mentioned to you as well, the employees that collude with drug syndicates, I've spoken to that now. And we've also, as you would be aware, and I'm here also to speak where the shoe fits, wear it. In 2017, we bust 17 of our own police members at the airport stealing and trafficking narcotics from evidence from drug swallowers. They are currently awaiting their trial, which starts in June. So we need to address those vulnerabilities, but something we don't have at the airport, for instance, that we do need. We need a detection device where we're able to scan human beings for narcotics. You see on the screen, that's a 4D scanner. It's not an X-ray scanner. An X-ray scanner, when cocaine is being swallowed in a liquid format, becomes difficult to detect. Bullets, not too bad, but you still need a professional to handle these machines. So in short, we've actually put a proposal, a business plan forward at Ortia on how we can do this in-house. At the moment, we have to take somebody that we suspect, and there are multiple signs that we look for on passengers once they've landed, and we also get certain information from the airlines because they've been briefed on what to look for, and then we will take those passengers to a hospital to be x-rayed and screened for narcotics. It's an ongoing problem. So cargo sector-specific crimes, when we do look there, and I'm speaking here from the crime statistics at OR Tambo, we've got probably the highest crime statistics of the airports in South Africa, but we are significantly lower than any police station that you will find. In fact, our conviction rate, not only our arrest rate, but our conviction rate stands somewhere around the 40%, which is actually very good. So theft out of cargo on the air side or within the warehouses. These are all done by airport employees. So it's either cutting open the actual cargo consignments as they're being dispatched out of the aircraft, and from there already having certain valuable items removed, placed into a waiting vehicle and driven away in the opposite direction to leave the airport out of one of our access gates. Otherwise, it's theft out of the actual cargoes when they're in the yard behind the warehouses, and then I'm sure the warehouse managers here probably attest to even theft within the warehouses itself. But this theft issue we deal with quite a bit. In fact, theft is the second highest crime at the airport, and about 50% of the theft is theft out of cargo or out of people's baggage. The other 50% comes from the land side, where you will have people's touting and stealing wallets, etc. Okay. Fraudulent cargo releases. This also requires your insider collusion. This is where the papers are provided to outside syndicates, and they will report and withdraw the cargo from the warehouse fraudulently so. The legitimate owner will arrive later only to find that their cargo has already been released. So we deal with these at the actual environment as well. I'm showing you these specifically because I know within the room the strategists are here as well with the equipment proposals outside to see how do we defeat these crimes. And when we're talking about the human element here, you've got to start looking at processes, the procedures, and the technical equipment in order to be put in place to better regulate the human element to prevent this. Okay. The days, colleagues, or good people, the days of us relying on the integrity of the employee is fast evaporating. I actually heard a saying, use the electronic capability where you can, use the human capability where you have to. All right. The smuggling of illicit goods, we've spoken to that. Even that requires the insider. I'm not necessarily talking about within the warehouses, but there are smuggling syndicates that are frequenting our Ortia warehouses, and they are colluding with SAPS members, with customs members, and having their illicit cargoes removed. We had a situation about a month back, no, it's about 2 months back now, where some of my SAPS profilers and searchers, there's a specific anti-smuggling team who profiles the airway bills and then goes and actually does a search of suspicious airway bills to see whether the consignment is legitimate or not. And they were actually caught on camera aiding and abetting Nigerians to bring into the country date rape drugs and abortion tablets, where they allowed the Nigerians to be the ones to check the boxes, wrap the boxes up again, and they walked away, and the consignment was going to be dispatched. But luckily a port health official was standing watching from a distance and went and reopened and looked to see what was in there. So as I'm saying, it's a problem. That finds its way onto the streets, and that could be your daughter or my daughter that falls prey to that, and we can't have that. All right, so again, there's been a criminal case and a departmental case that is open and being investigated against those people. The clearing of counterfeit goods as well. I think that's the name the wording speaks for itself. The false declaration of goods to evade tax, we see that. And then armed robberies. This has been the biggest concern for us. We've had armed robberies on the air side at OR Tambo Airport, where we've had cash heists carried out on the air side. But I must qualify this. These things are planned for 6 months or longer. The planning starts by, obviously, the concept of how they will do that, and then they start to recruit the employees in the key positions that they need to gain access, to have the aircraft parked on a specific parking bay, etc. So when this heist actually takes place, the normal security and policing at the airport is not even aware. They think it's day-to-day business going on. However, they're unaware that the guards have been captured and taken hostage at the gate and replaced with a criminal syndicate in the same uniform. That what's happening on the tarmac and the offloading of the goods is also the criminal syndicate doing that. It looks like it's legitimate ramp handling companies. So many of these occasions, this is why they get away with it. It's only after they've left and the whistle is blown that the response happens, only to find out we're too late. That's the airside heists. And the last one that we've had was in 2017, where this actually occurred at Ortia as well, which is one of the reasons that I actually got deployed there. Since 2017, we started picking up a phenomenon that they were using the Trojan horse methodology of coming into the restricted area through the front gates into the front dispatch or pickup area for the cargoes, the front side of the warehouses, in a Trojan horse fashion. They would come in with a vehicle and with a truck, and they would hide behind the boxes in the truck so that the gate security would not be able to see them. We've tightened up the procedures over time as we saw their modus operandi, so it's more difficult for them now. What they started to do after that at the gate, they started to recruit the gate guards. And so we've caught them out on the CCTV cameras, where the gate guards open the back of the truck, don't look inside, close the truck again, and allow the truck through. All right, there's 2 specific robberies that we've had in 2020 in July, the 17th of July 2020, and then another one on the 2nd of December of 2022. Now, the one in July of 2020, we actually responded in time. We had a good break there. One of the managers on duty inside the warehouse managed to see what was happening and sent a WhatsApp to the security manager off-site to say, look at your cameras. They reviewed the cameras off-site and they actually saw the people being taken hostage inside the warehouse. Nobody outside was any the wiser. Everybody outside thought it was business as usual going on. Everybody's trucks were loading. It was a Saturday afternoon. Now, just to show you, at that time, we've had SAPS members into that warehouse, the profiling and searching team, and walk through the warehouse, none the wise that there was an armed robbery going on. I question that. So the gate guards themselves allegedly didn't know what was going on until we actually found them on the CCTV camera, purposely not opening and looking in the back of the truck. So the insider collusion was there. The insider collusion from inside the warehouse to have tipped off that criminal syndicate about when the valuable cargo would be landing and where it was in that warehouse, because every time a cargo is gone to be robbed, they go up to the cargo and they know where it's positioned. And it's been the same syndicate. So in 2020, we managed to respond, the police and somebody from the security environment, and between the 3 of them, they shot and killed 2 of the armed robbers at the gate. They came to a head-on-head confrontation at the gate, and we wounded 4 others. The arrested 6, 4 wounded and 2 more arrested. So those 6 that were arrested out of the 20 involved, the rest climbed over walls, ran away. The second vehicle broke through the boom gates, drove off, because it was an unorganized response. It was something we were responding to. But those 6 have all received 25 years imprisonment now in October last year as a conviction. For that matter, the 3 persons involved in that shootout as well, the magistrate or the judge that was dealing with that case actually also recommended they need to be put in for citations for bravery. These were 2 young constables. They were not even a year, or they were just a year out of their police college, happened to respond there, got out of their vehicle, saw what was going on, and engaged multiple armed robbers, with one of the security personnel firing from his car as well. Running after, coming back into the fight, engaging again. It was a massive gunfight with these 2 young constables going on there for a while. So we've also applied for them for medals and for commendations from our minister. We need to acknowledge those. So just to actually speak to those, these were the armed robberies that have happened at Ortia over time. As you can see on screen, the 2nd of December, that one, we actually had a tip-off now from the environment, from the civilian environment, the private sector, to tell us that someone was going to rob, which was good. We were also told that there are people at the airport colluding, including police officers. So we kept this totally away from the airport. And I involved people outside of the airport, and you're probably aware, it was mentioned when I was being introduced, I was with a unit called the Special Task Force, Counterterrorism and High-Risk Operations Unit. We got them involved with the DPCI Hawks, and they actually came in and did the bust. So there are those that would say, 11 were arrested. Why? If it was a less tactical group, you would have probably had 11 bodies. And I know the sentiment in the country at the moment is probably we've preferred the bodies to the arrests. But that being said, we are sending a message out there since 2020 that don't come to Ortia. Either you're going to leave in a body bag or go to prison or face the justice that's coming. The next slide I actually want to show you is just a little bit of research that has been done at the airport. It was done personally by myself as part of a research study, and I was looking specifically into the corruption. And the question I was asking is, why is the workforce, specifically within the security sector, so lethargic? Could it be that all of them are corrupt? Could it be that the corrupt are intimidating those that aren't? Or is it just that those that aren't are so demoralized by knowing what the corrupt are doing, but feeling intimidated to come forward as whistleblowers because there's no incentive to do that, other than being victimized or becoming the victims of those that are corrupt? People, we must understand something. Some of these corrupt ones are making 50,000 Rand plus a night in human smuggling. It only costs you 30,000 Rand to hire a hitman to take someone out. So when you weigh these things up and you start to see why, then you can see the situation our country is actually in. So the respondents actually came through on how much of the workforce are corrupt. And 34% of them actually said, and I topped the actual category of more than 20%. So to show you the problem that we're actually having at the airport across all fields, vertically and horizontally. Obviously the workforce is bigger at the bottom, so you could expect as well at that level that there is more. But we're looking at 34% of them said that more than 20% of our workforce at the airport is corrupt. Right. To what degree above the 20%? I didn't want to go there. So what were the respondents saying in conjunction to where was the corruption taking place? And most of them said it was taking place within the terminal buildings. And this has got to do with the human smuggling and with the extorting of passengers. That's where a lot of the money is quickly made. All right, and you can actually see the cargo environment, 13%. The respondents' perception of actually who or what is the crime being committed. All right, the human facilitation being the biggest, bribes and extortion. All right, and you can see what else is on screen. But I want to actually get to the next slides. These are the respondents' views of the impact of corruption on the workforce. So this is what corruption is actually doing to those ones that are citizens with integrity, that are coming to work to fulfill their mandate. First line leadership authority has dissipated. So that was one of the impact of corruption on the workforce, is that they've lost that first line leadership authority. The low morale is inciting absenteeism and mistrust amongst the workforce. It's tarnishing the image of the SAPS in this case. Consequence management is no deterrent. And I think it's important that we take note of that. The labour processes at the moment are so difficult to get rid of somebody. It's a lengthy process. And we're expecting managers, specifically within the government departments who don't have this as their line function, to be dealing with the labour, to come up against shop stewards or unions that are dealing with this on a daily basis. So the procedural fairness versus a substantial evidence tends to become a weighing issue, and cases are lost based on technicalities. Intimidation and victimization by corrupt members, and then the lure of criminal gangs turns others to crime as well. So that lure of seeing nothing is happening to my colleague, they're getting away with it. By the way, those 17 police officers that were busted for stealing drugs, they're still employed at the airport because their disciplinary case is taking this long to conclude. It's now 2 years, almost bordering on 2.5 years later. We have put them in an environment, obviously, that they have got no impact, or they can't be affected by what they were doing. To move on, this is also just going to what the respondents feel we need to do to address corruption in the workplace. So I'm showing you this because there may be some here sitting with issues within their own organizations and wondering, and this comes from the horse's mouth. This comes from those on the ground that are saying, if you want to fix the corruption, this is what we need to do. So we need to get the job enrichment thing going. Rotations. And I can tell you now that if you rotate your people, and it's easier for us as government departments to some degree. Some of your businesses are that small that you've got one location and that's who they are, that's where they are. But for us, we need to rotate people. And I've actually proposed to higher levels within the South African Police Service that OR Tambo Airport, I need to do a purification of my workforce. We need to do integrity testing, which we have done. We've done vetting. Unfortunately, the labour side was not involved before the vetting was commenced upon. And so we've been told that the results are there. As a senior manager, I know who my corrupt people are. I need to manage them now. You can't do that with an environment like this. You need to remove them. Okay. That being said, the proposal is to start the process again, to go through integrity testing, and those that fail, whether it's voice stress analysis tests, whether it's polygraphing, without going through the full vetting process, is to have them transferred away from the environment. Leave me with a smaller workforce of only up to 150 personnel that I know I can work with. And then annually, from the police college, give me 400 to 500 new constables, and they will only be at the airport for 1 year. If we can fix the police like this, the police will start to impact everybody else at that airport that's involved in corruption. Because at the moment, many of the kingpins at our airports are the police members that are running syndicates with Home Affairs, with Customs, etc. Although they've all got their own, but we find when they're colluding, this is how it's going down. So we need to remove them, and we need to replace them with people. But I can say to you now that Home Affairs did the same strategy in 2013. They replaced everybody in the airport. I've heard that within a year, they were back to where they were. You need to keep on rotating the people out of this environment. And I said to you earlier that the human element is our biggest risk, is that the moral value or the moral fabric of our society is not what we maybe grew up with or expect of all others. Corruption is sensitizing and life skills. But I just want to say this. Part of an anti-corruption drive is to have awareness campaigns, isn't it? But I can tell you this much, that an awareness campaign doesn't turn somebody back from being corrupt. Once they've crossed the line, to bring somebody back that has turned to crime is almost impossible. All it does do is to those that are unsure or who are newer in the environment, it actually helps them to understand the shortfalls or to not be as naive as they would be. Focused undercover detection projects. We know that this is a deterrent. The moment that we start mentioning at the airport that the intelligence services are busy with a project, we find everybody backtracks a little because they're unsure about what's going on. But we've had very little success in the almost 6 years that I've been at the airport. We've had one success, major success, and that was the 17 that were caught for stealing drugs. Other than that, not much yet, but there are projects underway, however. Incentives and recognition programs. As I said to you earlier, and somebody actually brought this up within another department, why are we not bringing in whistleblower programs where there is a protection element also involved, but not only that, where we're also incentivizing people for coming forward? Because at this stage, there is no reason other than a moral obligation to come forward. Professional and personal growth. They reckon if we do that, it will help people to not consider, but when they've been stagnating in an environment, working the same position for a decade plus, they start to consider other options, seeing that they don't have other ways of progression. Personally, I don't agree with that, but this is coming from the respondents. I just believe you should have integrity, and that's the end of the story. Okay, the whistleblower program. So measures to deal with that insider threat, as we said, awareness campaigns against corruption altogether with an induction program for the new ones entering the airports, implementation of staff rotation strategies. If we can do that as well, it's difficult for syndicates to know. And I'm talking about strategic rotation after 3 to 5 years of working in an environment, remove them and move them out. I'm also talking about tactical rotation, which means on a daily basis. Today, sir, you're working at this gate. Tomorrow, sir, you're working within the terminal floor space there. So that syndicates can't get a pattern and a routine of who to approach to facilitate. The whistleblower incentives, integrity testing, conducting of lifestyle audits, the vetting of staff members and the screening of the service providers as well, and implementation of counterintelligence measures at the airport. So we've seen the South African crime pattern analysis at our airports. What our KO is telling us they are concerned about at our airports in the country And this is across the board. Landside, airside, terminals, passenger environment, cargo is the threat of terrorism. And if you look at the ICAO threats that are mentioned there, all of them are actually speaking to the terrorist threat in the world at the moment. Now, you're aware that ISIS threatened South Africa in July of 2021. When we said we were considering sending our forces over to go and fight the ASJ group up in Mozambique, ISIS sent a threat to say, if you come here, we will attack you on your home ground. It's a common strategy. Al-Shabaab in Somalia has been doing that to Kenya for years, for being part of AMNISOM and combating them on their home soil. To date, at least since we've been in Mozambique, we haven't experienced an attack here yet. You'll be aware that we've had a couple of scares. The most recent one late last year was the Santon scare, and obviously we mobilized and we did what we needed to do. But I'm also somebody that is busy writing the National Counterterrorism Response Plan for the country. And we've just concluded that, and that's where I was before I came here now, where we're actually preparing to brief the National Security Council Secretariat on Friday. But colleagues, I can tell you, the current terrorist modus operandi is to go for what they call publicly accessible areas. Yes, we've got critical infrastructure and national key points, but they want to make the biggest impact, and they want to make the impact in hurting people. Right, we're talking specifically religious extremist groups. Right, when we talk extremist right-wing groups, we talk about more targeting infrastructure and secondary people. But the other way around, we talk about targeting people. That being said, can you think of a better environment than an airport? Number one, it's publicly accessible. You can walk in there. Number two, it's a national key point. And if you end up setting off bombs inside of Ortia and going on an active shooting spree, can you imagine the impact on that airport being the gateway to Southern Africa? It's going to have a massive impact on our integrity of our country. ICAO will be involved in the Board of Inquiry in that, and we can lose our international status, which I'm sure most of you understands, which is granted to us through ICAO. I'm saying this because if we just consider the Brussels airport attack, which happened in Belgium, they sent 3 attackers to the airport and 1 onto a tram train. 2 of those attackers actually detonated the bomb standing at their trolleys. 1 of them walked away, chickened out, and moved off. But that's the aftermath. But if you actually look at that, that happened in March of 2016. It was also ISIS-backed. More than 32 civilians were killed and more than 300 were injured just in that attack. Now that was in your terminals building. I happen to also be explosives trained. So I can tell you that wherever you go and you confine an explosive device, it has a bigger impact. You talk about this within Ortia in our 8 terminals environment. It will devastate that environment in peak hour with people pushing their trolleys in there with bombs on them. So, and I'm speaking to this for a reason, because this comes back to the insider threat. If our people can smuggle human beings or specific items through the airport, what's to stop them smuggling something that they don't even know is a bomb onto an aircraft without knowing it to being paid for that? Because the South African Airways air crew that smuggled those cocaine packages through to Hong Kong, they didn't bring it onto the plane themselves. The air chef's truck brought it onto the aeroplane and loaded it onto the aeroplane, and they were told where it was, and they put it onto their carry-on luggage, and they actually took it off the plane. So if we can smuggle things like drugs, etc., onto planes, one day that will be a bomb that gets smuggled on. Whether the person doing it knows of it or not is But we look at a second airport attack, and that was in Turkey. And at Turkey, they even had the metal detecting devices at the entrance doors with armed guards or government personnel with assault rifles standing guard at the doors because of their threat in their country. The terrorists look at these things and they plan around that. So the terrorists sent the first attacker to the actual checkpoint, and he detonated himself in the checkpoint, which took out the armed guards and the checkpoint. The other attackers who were standing a little way off used that opportunity and ran through into the airport. And what you can see on screen there, that is where the checkpoint was blown up. And just the short period that they were inside that airport, automatic weapons, and they had suicide belts strapped around their waists. 45 people were killed and more than 230 people injured. So I've done comprehensive studies on the attacks around the world, and I can tell you that terrorist attacks happen in first world countries, as we know, France, Spain, and they've got their procedures in place. If you look at the amount of casualties that still takes place if there is, I don't want to say an intelligence failure, but if there is insufficient intelligence to prevent that from happening, it's going to be chaotic and there's going to be mass casualties, no matter which country it's in. All right, so just summarizing quickly, and bringing that terrorism side into it as well. We need to deal with the insider threat, not only to deal with the crime situation in our airports and the business sector that's being impacted by this, but the last point down there also speaks to the vulnerability of terrorist risk, the risk of terrorism in our countries. But I just want to say that in summarizing, and this is something I'm passionate about, we need a whole of society approach where we are trying to every year, the crime statistics come out, and who gets the hiding in the media and in the government? It's the police. It's the people in blue. But that's the crimes being committed. We can't put a policeman outside every house. We have started to fail. The moral fabric of our country has started to fail, where this is starting to occur. And we need to get back to where we actually start with the whole of society approach. And I'm telling you, it needs to start in our schools again. Because how many of us are sending our kids off to school? I've got a grandchild already now. My kids would also go to school. We are so busy as working parents that we send our kids off to school and they get taught what they get taught there. And we accept what they get taught there. And they're influenced by, so the influence that we used to have as parents on our children is not as much anymore. I'm not here to give a social talk about this, but it's just something that I know that we need to start considering in deeper ways if we want to deal with the corruption in society at the moment. We need to look at that moral authority in our leadership, which is key for our workforce management. Because as long as that moral authority is compromised, and I can tell you I see it within my own structures within the police at the airport, that there are certain people whose moral authority is compromised. And even if you give them an instruction, they can't have it carried out. Because the people that they have to give it to will say to them, I know what you did, I know who you are, you don't tell me what to do, I'll expose you. So this is where it's gone. So it's about keeping your nose clean from the beginning and just ensuring that your leadership has got its moral authority in place. Employing anti-corruption measures, I've spoken to that as well. That's all the proactive stuff to help to assist the people not to get involved in corruption. But obviously the counter-corruption is when we've got to deal with those that are involved in corruption. The whistleblower incentives, we need to sanction matters. And I can tell you, sometimes there seems to be a little bit of a whether we should or shouldn't. Now at the airport, we are not happy with what's happening on in the aviation community. Many times they catch people red-handed with items that they've stolen. They don't open a criminal case because they say it takes too much time to go to court. The courts are postponing, and it's my time, and it's waste of my time. So what they do is they deal with the person on the organizational level, and they dismiss them. And what happens is what we found at the airport is that the same person gets rehired by company B, and you find them back within the same environment wearing a different uniform. So that's why down there as well, create a dismissed employee blacklist wherever you are, that they cannot be rehired. Now some have said, but this will have a CCMA impact, etc., etc. We've got to find ways around these things. You know, when I hear that we've got policies are man-made. The only thing to me that's non-compromisable is biblical issues. Policies, if man made them, we can also change them. And we need to maybe look into some of those as well. Keep the public sector honest, transparent, and accountable. That's us. That's the government employees. If you know of somebody within my environment that's doing wrong, I welcome somebody to phone me and send me an email to tell me, I've got information on your people, and I gave you my word, we will investigate that. I have a happy day when we can arrest criminals. I have an even happier day when I arrest policemen that are criminals, because they don't belong in this organization. They're absolutely an abomination to the uniform. They're bringing the whole name of the police into disrepute. And the police has got a bad reputation. I'm sure there's everybody here that if you actually see policemen standing next to the road, do you really wonder if he's doing his job or if he's extorting somebody of money? Because even I wonder that when I drive home. If I see them standing there, it bothers me. Because the chance that they're actually doing their job or whether they're actually trying to get a bribe is okay. And then, of course, as I've said, the corruption at airports. It's impacting your business, right? It's impacting the image of this country. And, of course, it's also inviting the risk of terrorism at the airports, which we can't. I'm done. So thank you. I'm not sure who I'm talking to.
Thank you, Brigadier.
Thank you, Brigadier. If you can just hang on for me for a bit there, I'm going to open the floor for any questions. Are there any questions? I'm going to start over on this side.
Brigadier, thank you very much, sir. An excellent presentation. Can I ask the BMA, are we going to see that deployed across the land borders and seaports as well? And what sort of time frame would that be?
Yeah. So the Act has been operationalised, parts of the Act so far. You know that the President will operationalise parts of the Act as soon as the resources and the capacity comes into place. But as of the 1st of April, they've been mandated to be deployed at the airports. Currently, there is a border guard. These are BMA trained armed officers, which you'll find at some of our land ports already. They're not at all the land ports. Now, the BMA will be responsible for all ports of entry for the border control process and enforcement. They will also be responsible for 10 kilometers of the border line to each side of that port. So that is going to be their mandate. And as I say, they will be, as their capacity grows, they will start to populate wider and wider. They've started to populate. They're at two of our land borders, the main land borders, Lobombo and Beitbridge at the moment. And they'll be starting at Ortia, as I've the information from the 1st of April, and at other airports. So they're busy with the training of the border guards to put them into place. We must understand as well that they will be recruiting those from the immigration sector, from Home Affairs Immigration specifically, and the Inspectorate, from Port Health, those from the enforcement side of Environmental Affairs, as well as from the Department of Agriculture, into the BMA. So they will just swap uniform and form part of a new department in essence. So that part's easier than having to retrain new people for the actual border guard perspective.
Thanks, Brigadier. Excellent presentation. Can you please give us your evaluation of the Border Management Agency? What is it bringing to the table? What is not currently here? Is it another animal in another form? Or do you think that there is more that this agency will bring in terms of information sharing, synergy, working together, forcing stakeholders to work together and share information? Thank you.
General, thank you for that question. The BMA it's got a history that goes back to the early 2000s in South Africa. We're already back in the late 90s, for that matter. We started to, as government, see that we were fragmented on our borderline, and that there was a national intelligence estimate that it was going to become an exponential threat to South Africa later. So they started looking at how to deal with this. And just running quickly through the BMA history, we started then with the BCOC, Border Coordinating Operational Committee, the BCOCC. That was put into place initially under SARS Customs, and they were going to try to collate all of the border functions under them. When they saw that wasn't working well, they decided to look at external models around the world. They've looked at a number of them, and they looked at something called the Border Management Agency in other countries, which they've called the Border Management Authority in our country. So the baseline here is they want to actually collate all of the departments' sub-legs that are dealing with border control and the enforcement at borders, the border enforcement, and under one agency now, so that there's better communication. When I was introduced, you would have heard that we've got a JOCOM at the airport where we are 10 departments at the airport. And as 10 departments now, I have to chair that forum. I actually have got no real means of recourse if somebody doesn't arrive for that sitting. I can't, they're not in my department, I can't reprimand them. I can write a letter to a higher authority possibly. So these are the issues we have. We've got different styles of writing, we've got different methods of reporting, etc. They're bringing that now under one umbrella called the Border Management Authority. So the idea was to streamline the process now, bring it under one leadership, and the impact it's going to have is it will now mean that there will be a port managers forum which is going to be established at the airport. So there will be a new forum dealing specifically with the border control, which is the management of persons and the management of goods. And they will be impacting them within the immigration environment and within the cargo environment, as you could see. That's why I said to you earlier that at this stage, Customs SARS is not part of the BMA. They've got an implementation protocol with BMA, but it's envisioned that in years to come, the enforcement part of customs will move into BMA. But I speak under correction at this stage. Don't take that as a... But, General, it should actually streamline the processes at the airport. When it comes to dealing specifically with the cargo environment, you are always going to have the security side, which will be AXA, but you will have the enforcement side, which will still be the BMA now, and not having to report to Port Health, Environmental Affairs, Agriculture, and Customs, and for that matter, SAPS as well. As the South African Police Service, we've got Section 13(6) of our Police Act, which enables a policeman at a border post to be able to search any person or any vessel, goods, container, etc., aircraft, without a warrant, in order to see that the legitimate processing of goods and people is happening. If we suspect that something, we have the right to search without a warrant. That remains in play. So the police still has an umbrella function because we are constitutionally mandated to be able to operate anywhere within the Republic. And that includes the space of the BMA. So you'll still find us in these spaces as well. And that's why the police has not been integrated into the BMA. All right. General, I hope I've answered your question.
Brigadier, thank you very much. Awesome presentation. I just have one question. I failed to understand this. The people that was arrested, the police officers, why are they still in the employ of the SAPS? What happened to let's suspend? What happened? We've got one labor law, we've got one criminal procedure act.
Yeah.
What is the difference?
You see, this is actually what happened there. The evidence that is required, even in the departmental case, which is the labor case, is required in the criminal case. And the criminal investigators didn't want to release the evidence, the video evidence, over to the departmental case because it would be discovered then and it would be utilized, or the defense would be able to prepare their case prior. The DPP, the Director of Public Prosecutions, is, as we are speaking, sitting with his witnesses, preparing them for trial now, against those 17. But as I say, they didn't want to allow the evidence to be discovered yet. Otherwise, it would have given 2 years for these people to see what they've done and to start working out a defense against the video footage against them. So without the video footage, we also couldn't implement what we call an expeditious process. Because actually we've got a process within our disciplinary regulations where if we've got prima facie evidence like that, it's a meeting with a senior manager. Is that you? I see you doing that. Give me your evidence, the audio alter partem rule, and I make a decision. And I dismiss the person. And I've done that. I've had a case as recently as January now where I've had to do that. But in this case, the evidence couldn't be provided to the disciplinary officers. So they had nothing to work with. They were able to view it. They went to go and view it through the investigation process on the departmental side, but they were not able to actually attain it because now we needed to show it to the employees who are now the suspects in the case. So yes, that's what's actually unfortunately happened in this one. And it's not just this case. A number of our cases where it's criminal and departmental, we have the same issue happening. And yeah. So look, I mean, they've been to court. They're out on bail. So, you know, and the police regulations actually do that. The moment that you're taken into custody as a police officer and you've been put behind bars as a suspect, we terminate all of your benefits. We terminate your salary for that time. So the time period that they were behind bars, but all of them have been given bail. And the moment they've been given bail, we have to reinstitute. So the disciplinary process we go through the labour side, we're allowed to suspend for 60 days. We could extend for an extra 30 days. We had suspended for 90 days and eventually we had to take them back into service. So, but as I say, then I've just placed them in an environment where they don't have an impact, but still, they're there. And to be honest with you, they're impacting, they're belligerent and they're impacting the rest of the workforce.
So we have one final question here. Just a second.
Thanks, Brigadier. I was fascinated by the research that you have done, and indeed you tabled the issues that are pertinent. But what I like the most are the recommendations that you put forward. My question to you is, what are the prospects of your recommendations being successfully implemented, especially the job enrichment, the incentive schemes and all that. What are the prospects of them being implemented? We know the situations under which the police, if I may give an example, are working, especially at our airport. The economics, the infrastructure, their offices that they occupy, the guardhouses, the salaries and all that. What are the prospects? Because once we fix that, then perhaps the crime would come down.
I was saying something earlier today. I'm making myself quite vulnerable now, but I think I spend probably about 80% of my time as a manager dealing with internal issues and 20% on the operational crime issues. And this is because of the amount of compromising within my own members at the airport, as well as within other departments' members at the airport. So the collusion and stuff that's going on. And my time is taken up by actually trying to analyze and to find solutions. So what we do is we obviously go back to those that we know, that we've been proposed, that we've studied, etc. And we see now, how do we actually implement, how do we make this real and implementable? I believe that there are ways of doing this. When I'm proposing that we bring in 400 new policemen every year to OR Tambo, we've got a barracks, the Denell barracks, which can house 400 people at the airport. AXA has said that they would give us that barracks at a reduced rate, much reduced rate. So these are very feasible things that we can do. When we bring new people in, we know that they are far more malleable to what we would like to do in that working environment. In other words, if we want to rotate them on a daily basis, we know we can do that. We understand that at the airport we need to rotate our police officers. But because those levels, those first two levels of supervision have been so compromised, even if we give the instruction, as a senior manager, or my colonels that are even seated here today, they have to go out themselves to go and see whether that's happening, only to find that it's not, and that they have to then call others and ask what's going on. It's a continual fight to get things done because of the belligerence at that lower level. So that being said, you're quite correct in there are things that we can say, and they make good sense theoretically. How practical are they going to be to implement? And that's why we've made the proposal to our seniors in the police. We need to remove a certain amount of the police members at the airport. And we've done a full analysis there already, according to the vetting results that came out and other criteria, to our seniors to say, listen, please, if you want us to be able to manage a workforce, give us a workforce which is manageable, not those that are always belligerent and always finding reason to go to the unions to fight us and so on. And maybe just in saying that, we know that some may have different views about the unions and the labour organisations and so on. The fact of the matter is that they exist and that we need to partner with them and they need to partner with us. I know the realistic side of that as well. We've got two very strong unions within the police and we deal with them as well. But unless we become more educated as senior managers on actually the labour processes, we find that they utilise that lack of knowledge against us. But what we are doing at the airport is we are actually now taking hands with the unions. We sit with them prior and we do a lot of what we do, management measures to curb corruption, the anti-corruption measures that we implement. We will now consult with the unions so that when the members go to complain, it's not a strike, and you would think the police doesn't strike. They in their own way can disregard instruction and so on. So what I'm saying is that we need to actually work in a very compatible way with our unions and with our labours in order to get the message across, because ultimately the unions also want to see a progressive environment. But they play a huge role, whether we acknowledge that or not. And I must admit, I came to the airport, I came from a unit that we didn't know about unions. We knew about fighting terrorists and about fighting the big bad guys in the country, and that was that. So coming to an airport, unions to me were like the enemy. And I've had to learn over the 6 years I've been there that actually we need to actually take hands with them. They want to also know that they are empowered. But I know I'm actually now going to a really technical level about this, but it's the truth. When the unions and management are collaborating together, we find that we can get the workforce to actually start aligning much better than finding ourselves at loggerheads with each other.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're working on a bit of a time schedule, so I'm not going to allow any more questions. I'm so sorry about that. Brigadier Scott, thank you so much for the information. You're true to your word when you said in the beginning that you're going to talk about some stuff that's not widely spread in the media. And it was quite surprising as to the actual problems that you do have at the airport. And it's quite an eye-opener for me, and I'm sure for the rest of the attendees today. Okay, right, go. Thank you, Brigadier Scott.
Thank you. Do me a favor, stay in the room, and we're going to...
Our
because we have some...